Café de Flore and Les Deux Magots in Saint-Germain-des-Prés are among the most famous cafes in Paris, if not in the world. For more than a century, they've attracted writers, artists, politicians, and nowadays, millions of visitors from around the globe. But with that level of fame comes a question. Have these Paris icons become tourist traps? Are people still coming here because the experience is genuinely worth it? Or just to tick another place off their Paris bucket list? Last week, over 2 days, I visited both cafés, tried their food, tested their service. And what I discovered was a little more nuanced than I expected. Before we get started, I should probably make one thing clear. I've been coming to Café de Flore for years. Not every week, of course, but whenever I'm in Saint-Germain-des-Prés and feel like taking a break, this is one of the places I often end up. I usually order a Coke, sometimes a hot chocolate, sit on the terrace, and simply watch Paris go by. People watching is almost a sport here. But despite all those visits, there's one thing I've never actually done. I've never eaten at Café de Flore. But that's about to change. Today, I'm coming to find out whether one of the most famous cafes in the world can also deliver when it comes to food. One detail I particularly like here, the menu designed to look like a book published by Gallimard, one of France's most prestigious publishing houses. It's a reminder that Café de Flore has always been closely associated with writers and intellectual life. In fact, it's here every year that the Prix de Flore is awarded, a literary prize recognizing a promising young author, often for a first novel, chosen by a jury of journalists. As I started browsing through the menu, something quickly caught my attention. The booklet contains more than 20 pages in total, but only about a quarter of them are dedicated to food. The rest is devoted to tea, coffee, hot chocolate, wine, champagne, cocktails, and other beverages. In other words, Café de Flore is making a very clear statement about its identity. This isn't a restaurant that happens to serve coffee. It's a cafe that happens to serve food. And when it comes to food, the selection also tells a story. Salads, egg dishes, sandwiches, a few light meals, and even an entire page simply called snacking. This is not a traditional restaurant menu with starters, mains, and desserts spread over dozens of choices. Café de Flore clearly sees itself as a cafe first and foremost. The food is here if you're hungry, but it's not really the star of the show. And while the prices are certainly on the Saint-Germain side, they are not nearly as extravagant as I expected. One of Paris's great mysteries remains the popularity of French onion soup among tourists, regardless of the season, the weather, or the temperature. 33 degrees outside that day. Personally, I decided to start with something a little more refreshing, a nice cold Coke. Considering the weather, I probably should have ordered a salad, but the croque monsieur caught my eye, and at just 14 euros seemed surprisingly affordable by Café de Flore standards. So how did it taste? The good news is that the bread remained surprisingly tender despite being grilled, avoiding the dryness that sometimes affects croque-monsieur. The bad news is that there wasn't much else to say. Nothing was wrong with it. But nothing really stood out either. It filled a hungry stomach, and that was about it. At least, at 14 euros, it was one of the more affordable items on the menu, so I didn't feel too disappointed. If the croque-monsieur was surprisingly reasonable at 14 euros, the 8,50 euro Coke quickly brought me back to reality. So what's my verdict on Café de Flore? As a place, it's easy to understand why it has become a Paris institution. The location is superb, the terrace is one of the best people-watching spots in the city, and the historic atmosphere remains very much intact. As a dining experience, however, I found it far less convincing. The food was perfectly acceptable, but ultimately forgettable. The service felt rather indifferent, and neither quality nor value for money stood out in any meaningful way. This leaves Café de Flore with a score of 14.2 out of 20. Not a bad score by any means, but certainly lower than I had expected for one of the world's most famous cafes. Would I come back? Absolutely. For a drink, the atmosphere and the setting are still hard to beat. For a meal, however, I think there are better options nearby. Just 50 meters away from Café de Flore, and facing the beautiful Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, the oldest church in Paris, sits Les Deux Magots. Now, unlike Café de Flore, this isn't a place where I regularly stop for a drink. To be honest, I've never quite figured out why. The terrace is just as iconic, and the location is every bit as attractive. Like its famous neighbor, Les Deux Magots has been frequented for decades by the writers, artists, and intellectuals who helped shape Saint-Germain-des-Prés' legendary reputation. So I don't often come here for a drink. However, there's one thing I've always associated with Les Deux Magots: breakfast. In fact, when I compared 6 Parisian breakfasts last year, Les Deux Magots finished in second place. So after being pleasantly surprised by breakfast, it is now time to answer a different question. How good is the food? Personally, I find the interior far more appealing than Café de Flore's. The room feels warmer and more characterful, with the 2 famous wooden statues, Les Deux Magots themselves, watching over the dining room from above. But enough about the decor and the history. Let's take a look at the menu. Unlike Café de Flore, where food feels almost secondary, Les Deux Magots opens its menu with the food section, immediately suggesting a stronger restaurant identity. Like Café de Flore, Les Deux Magots offers a snacking section, although the croque-monsieur is noticeably more expensive here. The difference is that at Les Deux Magots, snacks occupy just a small corner of a menu that is clearly designed around full meals. A quick tip: if you don't see the chef's suggestions menu on your table, ask for it, as it's not always provided automatically. I'm about to go through the wine and drinks menu in some detail. If that's not your thing, feel free to jump straight to the next section of the video. There's a very interesting selection of wines here. One thing I particularly like is that many of the wines are available by the glass. If, like me, you often eat alone, it allows you to enjoy a good wine without having to commit to a full bottle. Tempting as the wine list was, I ended up ordering a Coke, just as I had at Café de Flore. With temperatures well above 45 degrees that day, I was far more in the mood for something cold and refreshing than a glass of wine. My Coke came with a bowl of olives, and I must admit they were rather delicious. As a starter, once again the heat influenced my choice. Rather than anything heavy, I went for a refreshing tomato salad accompanied by an excellent buffalo burrata. Now, this may sound like a minor detail, but it's exactly the sort of thing I notice. The salad was already seasoned, yet I was still given balsamic vinegar and olive oil on the side. And this wasn't just any olive oil, it was an award-winning olive oil from Provence. It's a small touch, but one that says a lot about the attention given to the ingredients. For my main course, I chose one of the chef's suggestions: coquillette pasta with summer truffle, parmesan cheese, and broad beans. To many French people of my generation, coquillettes are what Proust's Madeleine was to the famous writer, an instant trigger for childhood memories. For decades, they've been a staple of French family meals, school cafeterias, and simple weeknight dinners. Here, however, they had been elevated with the addition of truffle and parmesan, creating a dish that managed to be both comforting and surprisingly refined. The result was excellent, a wonderfully nostalgic plate of food, but one with enough sophistication to justify its place on the restaurant menu. And if you think serving coquillette in a prestigious setting sounds unusual, did you know that Air France serves a version of this dish in its La Première Lounge at Charles de Gaulle Airport? As tempting as the pastry trolley looked, I simply couldn't resist one of my favorite treats at Les Deux Magots, their hot chocolate. So I opted for the chocolat chaud gourmand, which by the way can also be ordered with coffee or tea. It arrived with a slice of almond cake, a bowl of red berries, and a scoop of vanilla ice cream, making for a delightful and surprisingly balanced dessert. Now I know what you're thinking. For the past 10 minutes, I've been complaining about the heat, and yet here I am ordering a hot chocolate. Well, what can I say? I'm French, and we are not always entirely logical when food is involved. Before we look at the bill, I need to say a few words about the service. My waiter, Olivier, was quite simply outstanding. After reviewing dozens of Paris restaurants over the years, I can honestly say that this was one of the best service experiences I've had in the city. And if the management of Les Deux Magots happens to come across this video, please take good care of Olivier, and perhaps consider a raise. And judging by the final check, I'd say Les Deux Magots can probably afford to keep talented waiters like Olivier happy. While I wouldn't describe it as excessively expensive, it's still quite a hefty bill for a lunchtime meal. After a very good moment at Les Deux Magots, it was time to brave the Parisian furnace once again. So what's my verdict on Les Deux Magots? Much like Café de Flore, you're paying for an exceptional location, a legendary address, and a unique piece of Parisian history. The difference is that here, the food lives up to the setting. From the burrata starter to the truffle coquillette and the indulgent hot chocolate, I thoroughly enjoyed every part of the meal. Add to that one of the best service experiences I've ever had in a Parisian restaurant, and it's easy to understand why Les Deux Magots remains so popular nearly a century and a half after opening its doors. The only real downside is the price. While not unreasonable for the location and the quality on offer, it's certainly not an inexpensive place to have lunch. That leaves Les Deux Magots with a score of 17.4 out of 20. An excellent result, and one that confirms what I had already suspected after my breakfast review. Les Deux Magots is far more than just a famous Paris landmark. It's a genuinely very good place to eat. So there you have it, two of Paris's most famous cafes, two very different dining experiences, and in my opinion, neither of them a tourist trap. If you've eaten at Café de Flore or Les Deux Magots, I'd love to hear about your own experience in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you very soon in another episode of Paris Top Tips.